Welcome back, everybody, to this episode of Hamilton Icons. I am your host and local real estate agent, Justin Little, and today I am joined by a very exciting guest. This is actually one that I personally have been looking forward to since she booked it in. Today, I am joined by Sarah Warry, who is an addictions counselor. Sarah, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I've been so excited also.
I'm happy. I'm glad we had a little bit of a run. We had a little bit of a recording issue prior, so now we get to do the intros again. But I appreciate you coming on because I know, like, a lot of people know my journey. I haven't drank now for almost 2 years, so I'm very public about it. But I have never actually sat down and spoke with an addictions counselor, which this isn't going to turn into a session, I promise. Well, I don't know unless you take it there, but we'll see. But yeah, let's talk a little bit about that. So what made you get into addictions counseling?
So I have always just noticed a lot of people are comfortable talking to me. This is a question I'm always asked because people think there's going to be this huge, intense story behind it. And it's like, oh, this has happened and stuff has happened to me. But it just goes back to that idea of I've found people for some reason find comfort in talking to me and I speak a language they understand, I guess. I am very animated. I have some mental health stuff. I've been through some stuff myself. And so I find I relate to people. And a lot of times I've went through what they have. We think of addiction and mental health as these big complex things and not to minimize what people go through, but it's pretty simple, right? Like people are hurting. Something has happened. There's trauma. Something is going on with them. They're dealing with stress. They have anxiety. Something is happening and they're looking for some kind of break or relief. And I've had a life that's just a roller coaster like this. And I've been there. So I know what it's like and can kind of be like, yeah, sometimes things suck. I totally get it. And just having someone say that I find like opens that door where people are more open to change and to be vulnerable because you got to remember, I sit down with someone I've never met and it's like, tell me all of the most terrible things you've ever done in your life and that have happened to you. Right. And that can be very scary. With addiction, you have to remember a lot of people have guilt and shame. So sometimes people don't want to go to counseling because I don't want to talk about how much I've screwed up or what I've done or all of these things or, what my parents did to me. I want to keep them packed down inside. And if they come up, I want to drink to kind of put them back. And that's the extent of it. So sitting down and talking about it brings them up and it's very emotional. As humans, we are not comfortable feeling uncomfortable. So we will do anything to avoid that. We talk about addiction and people will think about, drugs, alcohol. But if you think of sex, eating, gambling, like there's so many things that we do. Cell phones right now are just out of control with addiction and people don't realize it, but they also won't admit it, right? Like you look at most people, if they don't have their phone, they are losing their mind. So it's one of those things that we have to be conscious about how we view other people if they're addicted to drugs and alcohol, because most of us have something we're doing to try to avoid the things that are making us uncomfortable in life. And right now with, the inflation and like just not being able to find a job, everyone has some kind of struggle. And it's like, you can't just look at them like, oh, they're doing this because they're a bad person. They're essentially just trying to survive with whatever they're dealing with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sometimes they have those stresses in their life, right? And the only way they know how to cope with it is through alcohol or drugs or even, like you said, like sex or gambling, right? There's so many things. Phone, how like doom scrolling now. You're talking about phones, how addictive those are. I used to be very addicted to my phone. I always thought it was like, okay, it's business related. I have to have my phone on me in case somebody calls. I got to answer it, right? Being in real estate, you got to be available all the time. And then I started realizing, but then why am I spending like an hour at night on Instagram just scrolling reels, right? So it's super addictive. And I feel like all these apps and everybody are just trying to find more and more ways to make it more addictive, right? How long have you been doing it now for?
I graduated school in 2005, so I've been in and out. I've had some kids. I have lupus, so I was sick for a while, done some political stuff, but basically for the last 20 years, which seems crazy to me when I say, 20 years, because like in my mind, I'm like, I'm 20 years old. So,
I was going to say, did you start when you were like, well, I don't know, 10? Like, you don't look like you could have been in it for 20 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and that's kind of a gift and a curse, right? Because some people see me and they're like, oh, okay. And then some are like, what do you think you know? And it's like, I don't know. So.
Yeah, it's having that personal experience too, right? And then doing all the update stuff, like you said, like it's an ever-changing field as well.
Yeah, so it's like any science or medicine, right? We find out new information, things change, there's new methods of doing things. And so you have to keep on the ball and keep learning because at the end of the day, it's like these are people's lives. you know what I mean? Kind of in your hands. You don't want to give them the wrong advice. You don't want to tell them the wrong things. And so it's like you have to make sure you have a love of learning because you're always going to have to be keeping up.
And things change so dramatically. Like, I know you were talking about how you're getting really into the gambling part of addiction now, right? Or you said you were taking.
Yeah, I'm right now studying to be certified as like a professional gambling like addiction counselor. Like there's like addiction, we say addiction's addiction, but certain ones there's different stuff happening and we started to notice with gambling, it's a process addiction, behavior addiction. There are some different components than say alcohol or drugs, so there's specialized training. And I'm going through that now because we are seeing quite a bit of an increase in gambling in people that you normally wouldn't assume, we'll say.
Well, I can see it just now how accessible it is, right? Like these online casinos. And I think I don't know, I watch sports. So like 90% of the ads, 95% are probably gambling apps, right? And it's just so much more accessible. Before, we used to have to hop in the car, go to Niagara Falls or Brantford Casino if, you just wanted to, but there's a process to it. But now it's like you can just pick up your phone and I'm going to put $100 on this. So I'm going to gamble on this. I'm going to play blackjack on my phone, right? Like people can do that. It's just so much more accessible.
Well, and that's what it is that whole idea. And I'm finding, and it's not like I'm fairly libertarian, right? So I'm not like a prohibitionist, but it's like, responsibility. Who's responsible for what? And it's like you said, like I don't even have to get out of bed. I could start like, jeopardizing my mortgage, you know what I mean? All of these things. And it goes back to the idea of like, it's not just alcohol and drugs, it's sex, right? I can just start watching porn, gambling. I can just start playing cards, shopping. Okay. Like, I'm on Amazon. Now I've got a cart full of $6,000, right? It's like all of these things, like you said, you used to have to get up to go do them, which is good because in recovery, that's one of the things we talk about, delay, distract, all of this. When I have to just pull out my phone, I mean, that's it. We're going hard. So it's that thing, but also with kids, right? There's so much stuff accessible to them because they're also on a phone all day, right? And we're noticing within, music and movies, and I don't want to be that person that's like, oh, these things are making people do stuff, but in a sense, right, they do. They kind of promote certain things, and if you're not conscious about those messages, you fall into that lull. And so kids are playing video games even, and there's different stuff in there with gambling, and they're getting addicted to that. And so it's like, okay, this is a problem. We need to start doing something.
You said so many incredible things there. I feel like there's a few that I want to unpack. The first off, the $6,000 Amazon cart. I feel like my wife's going to feel personally attacked by that. And then when you talk about the distract, it was distract and delay. Can you just touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, so it's one of the things we know that when you're, sorry, I have ADHD, so I don't like sit still. When you are in recovery, right, there's this thing. So people use sobriety, the idea I'm not drinking or using drugs interchangeably with recovery. So when you're sober, you're not really doing the work to find out like what's happening, are there things in my life that are problems, the stresses that I'm running from, stuff that's happened to me that's maybe traumatized me that I just kind of thrown in what I call the hypothetical garbage can and I just keep pushing it in. Where recovery is, okay, I'm not using, but I'm also trying to understand, why am I using? What's going on there? There's all of these things. And so with that is that work of delay and distract. I'm understanding, okay, I'm having a trigger I want to use, so I have to take my mind off of it. So how do I delay that kind of going to do it? Right? In the early stages, how do I distract myself? And when you talk about cognitive behavior therapy, right, we understand that thinking leads to emotions and feelings and then behaviors. So if I can delay and distract myself, I'm going to kind of put a barrier, a roadblock in between me using. So one of the things I say to people, like, if you are looking to stop using alcohol, get the alcohol the hell out of your house, because just like the phone, right? If I have to get up and drive to the liquor store, I have some time and it gives me that gap to think about what I'm doing and challenge whether that's a good idea. In AA, they have this thing called playing the tape through. So that gives me a good, say, 15 minutes to get to the liquor store and say, what am I doing? Why? Am I going to be happy with the outcome of this? Because I'm thinking in the moment. I'm thinking of right now, I want to get rid of whatever the hell I'm thinking about, whatever I'm feeling. But after the fact, there's probably going to be a consequence. So that delay and distract gives you that time to try to, again, put that roadblock in to really challenge yourself about, what else can I do to help myself in this moment? Because what I'm going to do is probably going to create more problems and not solve the one I'm having.
Yeah, and you're right, like, playing the tape through, I've heard that before too, where it's like, you run like, "Okay, what is this gonna look like if I do this? Am I gonna have fun?" Then you think about the next day and how it's gonna be affected, right? Especially with drinking, right? So that's a good strategy. You also touched previously on kids and access to phones now and everything that they have, and I see with my nephews, they're on, like, they watch YouTube on TV, like, YouTube Reels on TV. Like, that's their consumption. They don't just sit and watch a TV show anymore. But also, you're right about, like, in games, they have these like skins and stuff that you can buy, or you got to buy this chest and then hope you get like this really rare skin, right? And it's turning them, you're right, like into little gamblers. Like, it's kind of doing it.
Yeah, and like I'm gonna get so much slack for this, but it's like companies know what they're doing. You know what I mean? Like I'm very for people having businesses and working for themselves, but at the same time, it's like that kind of, you know, companies are essentially the drug dealers in that addiction, right? And if you know what you're doing, if I put a certain flicker rate on the screen, if I put, every 10 seconds, the reel changes and it kind of does that, you know what I mean? That's the drug dealer that's saying, here, try this one. How does that feel? How does that feel? And then at the end of the day, we see what it's doing to people, but no one wants to be responsible because then they point, fingers. Who's responsible? The company? Is it the parent? Is it the person who's addicted? And, nothing ever gets solved. And it's like, okay, well, what do we do moving forward? We have to do something, right? Because if it gets too out of hand, then what? We have a healthcare system right now where, it's not sustainable. If you have a mental health problem, you're waiting sometimes 2 years to see a psychiatrist. And if your family doctor won't give you psychiatric medication, it's like, what do you do? Oh, well, I'm going to self-medicate with alcohol or drugs because that's going to help me get through because the other option might be me not living, right? So you have to be mindful of that.
Yeah, well, that's scary for sure. And even the things like they do to get people addicted to TV, like you're right, like the flashes and all that. I heard that is a thing with kids shows and stuff for kids programming where they actually do know what will engage kids longer if they change this every 7 seconds or they do this. Like, it's crazy in depth. Like before it was I remember I'm actually I'm watching Miami Vice for the first time right now. I just love it. The 80s. But the first season, one of the main guys, Sonny Crockett, the guy that wears the white blazer, the white pants, driving the Ferrari, he chain smokes in the show because he was a chain smoker in real life. I was actually sitting there being like, man, he looks cool with a cigarette in his hand, right? But obviously I'm not going to start smoking. But you can see how when you see stuff like that online or you're exposed to it, you start thinking, hey.
Yeah, I said to a friend the other day, because I never was one to sit and just watch reels. And about 4 months ago, I started at the end of the day, I lay in bed and I'm just like this, watching, reels. It's a problem and I know it's a problem. And I'm watching like these ones of people like speeding and driving and racing and they're like getaway cars and stuff like that. And I'm like, that would be so cool to be the getaway driver, right? And it's like, you'd go to jail. Like, you know what I mean? No, the end goal is you're in jail, but it's like you're watching it and it's like your dopamine's going and you're like, yeah, that would be amazing. And then you're just like, come back to reality and you're like, no, right? But some people, they don't come back to reality.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, because then they go do it.
And it's tough. And especially with social media, it's hard now to determine in reality between like what is real and what isn't, right? And social media, like I just now assume that everything I see online is just fake. It's not real. People's lives, like a lot of it, there's just so much fake content out there.
Like this might have to be edited out. I say to my clients, because that's one of the things when you think about addiction, right? It's like the stresses or like, I'm not good enough. My life's not good enough. And, I'm like, get off of social media. It's bullshit. Nothing there is real. Everyone's showing like the best moments of themselves. They're editing their pictures. They don't look like that. They're like, they don't have those things. Like I remember when I used to have a personal Facebook, my friends would get mad at me because they'd be like, oh, look at the flowers my husband got me. And I'm like, what did he get? Well, I'm in the comments, right? Just like making these really ignorant comments because it's like, yeah, you know what I mean?
I like that you were the gaslighter on Facebook. Nah, I know. I
Yeah,
always
yeah,
wondered
yeah.
the people commenting.
Yeah.
That was you.
Yeah, it's one of those things because, yeah, a lot of times it's like social media right now, they're showing, especially in younger females, right? Like body dysmorphia is like blown up. Like with Snapchat, they even have, it's like you have like snap dysphoria because of like just the way it makes you look. And then you look in the mirror and you're like, oh, well, I'm disgusting. You know what I mean? So it's like all these different things. And again, right? It's like everyone's doing it. It's a norm. No one's saying like, hey, don't do that. Like, unless you go to like countries like China and stuff like that now, they're starting to be like, yeah, you get so long and we're going to actually shut the internet down. We control your stuff. And we look at that and we're like, oh, my freedom. But at the same sense, like you look at it and they're like, we don't want the population to have this mental health crisis. And so it's kind of, again, that thing of like what's right and what's wrong, what's moral, what's not, right? Do we just let it go like unfeathered? No one's kind of monitoring it? Or do we start telling people like, this is the law, and then people revolt because they're like, well, I have freedoms, I want autonomy to choose.
Yeah, and it just creates, like you said, the mental health issues, and just I think the access, like you said, everybody posts their highlight reels, and I could see the dysmorphia for sure, right? Because even like we're both lucky enough to have grown up in the age pre-technology, and then technology came in, right? And it's like when you were younger, like now anybody can go online and you just see like some cool guy in California, or like this girl with like a really great, just in a fitness, whatever. Like if you're a girl, like you look at that and you see it and it's right there, like available to see. Whereas like we didn't have that growing up. Like for us, it was like, oh, like my cousin Joe has like a souped up Honda Civic. He's pretty cool, like it. But now you can see like everything, and then it just puts so much images into your head about, like, it makes you feel not as inferior, I guess is where it makes you feel inferior, right?
Yeah. So, and that's one of the things when we look at psychology. So we have core beliefs or schemas. And so if I have negative ones and, if I heard messages growing up, like you're stupid and you're this and you're that. And so I constantly have this voice repeating those. I'm seeing stuff and it's telling me, see, you're not good enough because look what these people have. And it's almost confirming these fake things. And it'll drive people over the edge, right? And again, it's like, okay, well, I hate these thoughts. I can't escape my own mind. What am I going to do? Yeah, so if you have these negative thoughts and you're living with that, that's obviously very uncomfortable, right? And it's like you want to shut them off. And if you don't know how, it's like, okay, I can't jump out of my own body, but I can use alcohol or drugs or something else to kind of get a break, right? I can actually do something to stop those thoughts. But it's only temporary.
Yeah. And you got to change your thinking too. Like you said earlier about how you need to, you can't, like some people just stop drinking and they think, okay, like, yeah, I've stopped drinking, but they're not actually dealing with the issues, right? So you think it's much more important just like to deal with the issues, because I think you're right on some level. When people do drink or do drugs, whatever they're doing, it is a bit of an escape from something that happened, or they just don't want to deal with. I don't know. That's how I personally feel.
Yeah, and I'm not saying everyone, like it's not absolutes, but for most people, like that's the thing, is they're drinking or using for a reason. So if they're not addressing that reason, eventually they're going to return to that behavior. And so that's what it is. And it's one of those things is we don't want people to like, every time you go back, I have a slip, I have a relapse. Now I think negative about myself. If my activating event was negative messages, I'm just going to make things progressively worse, right? And so it's kind of that idea of, yeah, there's sobriety, but, it's way better if we kind of look at why am I doing this? How can I make these changes? Like, how do I become like healthy overall?
Yeah, you got to start becoming healthy overall, right? And making those lasting changes, because like I read one book that I read that was actually just a 3-book series, Sober on a Drunk Planet. I forget who the guy was, but it's like a 3-book series. It was really good. And he's like, he never went through AA to get sober or whatever. So I just like that kind of perspective of it, because I've never either, right? But I think what some people think when they think addiction, they think about you have to be like some guy shooting drugs on a street corner, right? They don't think about how like somebody just going home and having 3 beers every night or something could be seen as an addiction, right? Do you think that there's a negative stigma around it and people don't sometimes identify themselves?
No, that's exactly what it is, because I will work with people who've literally lost their job and I'm like, do you think this is a problem? They're like, no. They're like, no, I'm not homeless. I'm not, I'm only drinking beer. I'm not smoking crack. Like there's this, we tell ourselves these different things. And again, it's like, does that go back to that guilt and shame? Or is this kind of what we've projected of, addiction is the guy that's unhoused that's using fentanyl. If you're home and going to work, what they used to call functioning alcoholic, you're totally fine. So it's that whole thing, because I actually teach too. And so one of the things I always bring up, I'm like, what's the difference between you being addicted to cigarettes and coffee and that guy being addicted to cocaine? The same thing's happening in both of your brains. You're just unhappy about the other behaviors he's engaging in because of the cocaine. So because you can afford your cigarettes and that, this guy loses his job and he's now robbing people or doing whatever. You know what I mean? But the same things are happening to both your brains. It's an addiction. That's a science. And people lose their mind and get mad at me. And I'm like, science.
Yeah. So you said you do some teaching. Where do you do teaching?
I actually sat on the board of directors for our regulatory body for addiction counselors for about 8 years. We made some changes and now I actually do teaching through them. So counselors in both Canada and the US will come and we do like virtual training. I talk about harm reduction, working with individuals involved in criminal justice, just kind of like more specialized stuff because we're starting to see that even though someone has an addiction, they might have something else attached to it. And it's like, okay, how do we work with both of those together? Because they're often correlated, right? So if, someone is involved in criminal justice, we know that there's a high rate of trauma. There's a high rate of drug alcohol use. So we have to work with those things together. When we look at harm reduction, I was actually the chair for the harm reduction committee looking at kind of like, how do we actually navigate this? Because in some jurisdictions, it's people are still dying. Not only are they still dying, but the public kind of hates it. So it's like, what do we need to do to make that successful? So again, right, with the science, everything changing, you kind of keep up with it. And at the end of the day, it's really just like, how do we help people and how do we kind of share knowledge, right? And if I know things, I'm not going to gatekeep. So how do I help other people kind of use what we've seen is working?
Yeah, that's great. And you touched on the criminal justice there. Do you want to talk about your new role a little bit?
Yeah, so I am with a company called CARA, Canadian Addiction Recovery Association, and I've just been given the role, the director of, and I don't even have the title right because it's just so new. It's like criminal and justice, like reform, basically working with individuals that are involved in the criminal justice system. And we're getting some programs rolling out because we recognize that a lot of people involved in the criminal justice system do have alcohol, drug use, stuff like that. And if it's not addressed, we see recidivism, right? And they're ending up, it's like just a revolting door. And so we're like, so how do we help them? So once someone's out, they're out. They can move on with their life. They can, reestablish life with their family. They can get a job. They can get housed, all of these things, and not just keep having that suffering, not only for them, but the community, their family, all of these things. Again, with addiction, you look at criminal justice, criminal activity, it can become just as generational. So it's not just, how do we help this individual? It's kind of like sometimes putting a stop to it in that line. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you can be the one to stop the generational issues, right? Which I get. Not like criminal in my family, but my from like the Newfie side, long line of drinkers in it, right? So, putting a stop to that generationally is huge, right? But I could see what you're saying. If somebody grows up and they're around a family that's involved in, criminal activities and stuff like that, or a certain lifestyle, then you think they're more inclined to get into that themselves.
Well, it's that kind of thing, right? When we look at nature versus nurture, they're starting to show, yeah, your environment is actually one of the biggest factors in what you're going to do. You're kind of conditioned because you normalize whatever you're going through. Even right now, they're looking at diseases and like epigenetics. It's like, yeah, you might have certain genes, but if I put you in a certain environment, they're going to go off and you're going to have those versus someone else might have those same genes, but they're not in that chaotic environment like you. They're not under that stress. They don't have those things. So they're never going to get whatever the disease they are like predisposed to, right? So the same is kind of psychology. We know, again, it's like if you are in a family where there's a lot of chaos, you're going to have trauma likely. And if you have trauma and it's not treated, you are going to want to somehow not live with that. Right? Again, when we look at addiction, it's like addiction isn't a drinking problem. It's not a drug problem. It's not a this. A lot of times it's a trauma problem, right? People have went through stuff and they don't feel good. So if we can kind of help people, and sometimes it's not like people always think, oh, people are malicious. I go, if you look at the world right now, right? It's like I'm a single parent and I work. Let's hypothetically, my kids, I come home at the end of the day and I'm just burnt out and I'm staring at my phone. And my kid's like, look at what I did, this and that. You know what I mean? And they don't have that logic yet to understand, mom's tired. She works all day. She cares about me. It's just in this moment, you know what I mean? She's not. They think you're not paying attention to me. And, they look at you as this superior. And it's like, so there must be something wrong with me. Right. And then they take that and that as simple as it sounds, it can create trauma over a period of time. Right. So again, it's like understanding all of these things and the mental health of it. It's a lot. So we go back to trauma and that family of origin, and it's like, how do we help people? Because sometimes there are things where the adults in the house coulda, shoulda, woulda, went and got help, but sometimes it was like those things that we don't see as, oh, this can be traumatic because it's just normalized part of life.
Yeah, and you know what? Even growing up, like I know it's very different now. I feel like parenting, being involved with kids is a lot different than it was back in the day, right? Where people weren't as exposed to. Back in the day, like parents didn't care. Well, they didn't care as much, but it was different, like smoking around kids or drinking, whatever. It was just because it was normal, right? Have people over, have a party, that kind of thing. Whereas I feel like parents is a lot more cautious in general now. I don't know if I'm wrong with that assumption,
No,
but I
you
feel like now
are.
people are more aware of these things.
Yeah, no, that goes back to that science and understanding, right? We've learned, like, oh yeah, if you're in environments where that happens, again, I'm not trying to be like, oh, everyone's parents, you know what I mean? If you grew up in the 80s, your parents are terrible. But like, I mean, I was 13. By the time I was 13, I was drinking, I was smoking, you know what I mean? Because it's like, I saw that and I'm like, oh, that's what you do. You know what I mean? It's so me and my friends, it's what we see at home. And so you're stealing cigarettes and alcohol and you know what I mean? You think you're fancy and doing all those things. And yeah, we've caught on. Oh, okay. Yeah, if that's what happens and you see it, you know what I mean? You either glamorize it or you start doing it. So it's like, it's one of those things where we have to look. And again, people are like, I hate Sarah. It's like, oh, I'm part of the problem. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I like when you said, oh, with the cigarette, oh, we're fancy. I saw a guy yesterday. I was driving, showing houses, and I looked over and there was a guy on his front porch. He was in like track shorts and like a wife beater t-shirt, like the turtleneck. Or
Yeah.
not turtleneck, sorry, the you know what I'm talking about, like the Italian undershirt, yeah. And he was smoking a pipe, like a long pipe, and I'm like, I feel like he thinks he's so classy. It was such a mixed match. So you just said with the cigarette fancy, I thought about that guy smoking the pipe.
Yeah. But yeah, that's what it is, right? And it goes back to that thing. And like, I know, like, even with like cocaine, right? Like, you go back to the 80s, it's like cocaine was like, oh, if you're rich, you do cocaine. That's fancy drug. You know what I mean? I can't be an addict because I'm fancy and it's expensive. And it's like, I'm a business person. And it's like, you have an addiction, man. Like, yeah, it's the same thing. It goes back to, the guy doing cocaine and you smoking a cigarette. The same thing is happening up here. It doesn't matter what you try to tell yourself or how you dress it up. That is the same mechanism, right? Something bad can happen.
And I feel like people use it as a justification, like, I smoke cigarettes, but I can still go to work and function. Whereas obviously if I do cocaine, I'm off the rails, right? So I can also see how people could probably justify what they consider lesser addictions to not even be addictions because they're not like immediately destructive.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, they do. But at the same time, right? Like, I'll say to people, I'm like, okay, it's just a cigarette. And again, people are like, I hate her. It's like, but what are all the different disease? Like, what are the health problems it can cause you? Right? Like, at the end of the day, like, it can still do damage to you and the people around you, right? We're learning second, third hand smoke, same thing. When you stop using alcohol and drugs, you can actually get what we call cross addiction. So if I'm still dealing with stuff in my life and I'm unhappy, okay, I've stopped drinking, but every time I get mad, and this is me, I pound back 5 cupcakes or donuts, right? It's not alcohol, so it's fine. Okay, but over a period of time, what's going to happen to me? I'm still spending money. I'm still not dealing with my emotions. I'm not looking at what do I need to change in my environment. And maybe I'm going to get diabetes or I'm going to get heart disease. I'm going to get something. So it's that whole thing, right? It's like, oh, it's just this. And again, it doesn't come down to what the thing is. It's what it's doing to you and why you're using it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And not to add to the addiction, but the Krispy Kreme donuts just opened on the Rimal. Which, secret tip for that, if anybody's going to Krispy Kreme, there's an express line if you just want the regular donuts. Because right now I've been going by, there's a lineup out the door. But yeah, no, I could go through like a dozen of those, just boom, boom, boom. But you're right. Because you're like, oh, I'm not getting drunk, right?
Yeah.
And just eat like 6 donuts.
Yeah. But the thing is with that, it's like afterwards, you still have that guilt and shame, right? And that's what I say to people. Like, if you're doing something, that's what you want to watch for. Because if you notice it in excess, it's like, what's happening after? Am I feeling like crap about it? Am I questioning myself? Because that's how, you're telling yourself. I always say it's like in our mind, we have a dashboard like a car. There's guilt and shame light comes on, this comes on, this. And people see that and they're like, oh God, no, I'm broken. Something's wrong. And I go, no, that's warning you. Take that and use that, to kind of realize you need to make changes or do something in your life. It's there to help you. Don't ignore it or avoid it. So, but that's part of what I call it the addict brain. And again, people are like, oh, so offensive. Here's our normal brain, and here's the brain that wants to stay, using substances, and it starts to lie to you. And that's when you talk about that kind of justification, those denial mechanisms, right? Rationalizing, I had a hard day, I had a good day, I had a bad day, this is happening, this is happening. We find reasons why it's okay because we don't want to look at ourselves and say, maybe it's not.
Mm-hmm. It's so true. Like people will go to it when it's a negative experience, but then they'll go to it when it's a positive experience too. Like they're just looking for excuses all the time, right?
Yeah.
One thing you even talking about smoking that I was just thinking about, because me and my friends, we somehow were in this gap where smoking wasn't something like none of my friends smoke. Just when we grew up, it was like they were really hard on like not smoking, so none of us smoke. But now the younger generation I'm seeing is vaping. So I feel like we were part of this 10-year stretch or something where they actually stopped kids from smoking, but now vaping is huge.
Yeah. So I just read something, and this is the thing when I talk to people, I'm like, do you smoke? They're like, no. I'm like, but are you nicotine free? They'll be like, well, I vape. And I'm like, but you're addicted to that. Right. And again, it's like, no. They just showed a report now that it's been out long enough. Again, science updating, we learn things. The effects of the vaping are sometimes you can't change them. It's not reversible. Like it's permanent, like, and it's worse than possibly, or I'm not going to say worse, but it's a different kind of damage than cigarettes. And so again, it's one of those things that transfers. Okay, I'm not smoking cigarettes, I'm vaping, but there's still consequences, right? At the end of the day, it's like, am I looking at what consequence is worse, or am I saying, how about no consequence?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think people think that it's not as bad as smoking because there's not, combustion, and it's not smoke, but I guess it's not, I don't know, it's not smoke, it's like it's vape, I guess, vapor. But I guess still any foreign substance entering your lungs still isn't going to be good for it, right?
Well, yeah, and that's that thing, right? Again, is like as time goes by and we start to be able to see the side effects and what it's actually doing, it kind of sucks because just like, cigarettes, you see those ads from like the 80s where they're like in the hospital with a guy that's dying and they're like, smoke Marlboros. And he's like smoking right in the hospital. And then now if like, you showed that to someone, they'd be like, what the hell? Right. But it was so normal back then. So everyone's vaping. And I'm like, yeah, in 20 years though, they're going to be like, why would you do that? We didn't know. Right. We just put blind trust into, like you said, I'm going to just put these things into my body and I will be totally okay.
Yeah. Your doctor's favorite cigarette. I like that. Those ads.
Yeah. It's like, right? But back then it was like, oh, yeah, my doctor likes it. Right. Again, now that we know, we're like,
yeah, that's ridiculous, right? And vaping now, it's made its way back in. They're huge. There's vape shops everywhere now, right? Have you noticed since weed became legal, have you noticed any effects from that?
Yeah. So here's another thing where I have people actually fight on me the internet and they're like, weed's not addictive. I'm like, okay. One of the things was that some people didn't use because in their kind of car dashboard, the moral light would go off. They say, well, this is illegal, therefore it's not right. I'm not going to engage in it even if I want to. This is the rules of society that I abide by. And so when it became legal, I've just noticed a bunch of people, they're like, and they're using, and the thing is just like alcohol, they're using it as an avoidance technique. They're not dealing with the problems in their life. And so the problems are piling up and they're using more and more. And they're like, so I'm burnt out or I'm so high that I can't function. You know what I mean? I come home at the end of the day and I'm so stressed, I'm getting high. And again, it's like, I'm looking at my kids and wanting to play with them, but I'm also like, kind of doing one of these.
Yeah. And long term, like you said, it's slippery slope, right? You might even start small. But you're right. I never thought of the aspect of, okay, this is illegal, because I know people that are older, 50 plus, that when it became legal, were like, oh, I'm going to smoke a joint now, right? Like they haven't smoked a joint in like 30, 40 years. There was one guy in particular, who I'm not going to say, but he's an older guy who was in his 50s at the time. And I know he smoked a joint. And he was just so high, this guy. He ended up going home, right? And he thought he was having a heart attack. And so they brought him to the hospital and he wasn't having a heart attack. The doctor's like, you're just high, right? Like, and they said, we've actually been seeing this a lot where people are smoking. I guess older people are smoking and then they're paranoia or something's getting to them, and then they just think like, oh, I'm having a heart attack.
Yeah, no. With edibles, it's really bad because like the method of ingestion also affects like how it affects you, right? So it's like people started getting edibles because you can go get all these new like all these things that again we didn't really have much of. Like when we grew up, it was like you're rolling a joint or you're smoking out of a pop can, like you're doing right. And now it's like you're like, I can get this, triple chocolate fudge cookie. And they're like not eating a piece, they're eating the whole thing and they're like calling the police. They're like, I think I'm dead. And the police show up and they're like, what'd you do? They're like, cookie. So
I would love to see how many calls are like that because it's true. And so I was always wondering what that would actually, the effects of it would be. Do you see it as like being a slippery slope? If people have access to that, they might end up going on to further addictions or?
I mean, it all depends, right? Like that, I always talk, one of the worst things I guess possible was like in the 80s with reefer madness, right? Because like they overdid it. I was like, if you smoke this, you're going to die. And it's like, I'm one of those people would have been like, I'm going to test this out. Not dead, you know what I mean? And so what it did, it created this culture now where people think like, that's BS. There's nothing wrong with it. That was a scare tactic. But at the end of the day, it causes health effects. You know what I mean? You are ingesting smoke into your lungs. It's affecting the chemicals in your brain. It's doing different things. The residual effects of marijuana, if you smoke it often and a lot, even when you're not smoking, a day later, you have a cognitive decline, right? So if you go and you are working for somewhere that Transport Canada regulates you, yeah, you're going to get your ass handed to you if you're smoking all the time, if you get tested.
Yeah, for sure. And it's crazy the effects. Like I actually had a weed drink. I don't really, weed's never done anything for me, but I had a weed drink, I don't know, maybe 2 months ago. And actually we have like vertigo. My mom gets vertigo, which is like when you get really dizzy and you can't sit up. And I woke up the next day. It was the first time I ever had it. It's like, so it came on and I was like, oh my God, I can't even sit up. Right. So you're right. It's sometimes even that delayed effect that you get with it. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's that thing, right? So like we know, like if you have edibles, if you smoke it, this and that, like it's the same with, any other drug, right? If I'm snorting a drug, if I'm banging a drug, if I'm eating the drug, it's going to affect you differently. It's going to stay in your system. It's going to do all these different things. But the thing with the marijuana, people, you got to remember, like it's fat soluble. So it stays in your body longer than any other drug. So if you do work somewhere where you're going to be getting tested, you are in trouble. So, and the whole thing comes up of, it's legal, so it's fine. Yeah, well, I mean, alcohol's legal. I can't go home, pound a bunch of beers, wake up at 5 a.m. still drunk and, go drive a taxi.
Yeah, no, that's a good point for sure. So working obviously with a lot of different people. I know one question that's like just one of the hottest topics right now in Hamilton is obviously like the homelessness and it being tied to addictions and stuff. I know like this might be a hard question, so you don't have to answer it, but like, do you see a way kind of out of this or how we can kind of help resolve this situation with the addictions on the street? Like, is there?
Yeah, I actually worked for an agency in the city for a number of years, and that was the targeted population, the unhoused population. And I mean, there's different things that happen, right? There are people where you might lose your housing, just like you might lose your spouse or your children or your job because your addiction gets out of control. However, there are people where they're just down and out on their luck. Something happened, they lost their job, and I mean, they're on the street, and that's not a good place to be. You go back to mental health, right? If I'm depressed because I'm homeless, right, I might start drinking or using drugs because it feels like crap. Right. And so it's that idea of like, you have to talk to the person. We can't just generalize, oh, if you're homeless, it's because you are an addict. Did you develop that addiction as a result of becoming homeless? What else is going on? Is there trauma? Is there something happening? We look at things, someone might have been sexually assaulted while being on the street. Again, I don't want to relive those thoughts over and over. So I might come across someone that has some kind of drug. I try it and I think, oh, this makes me forget about that thing that happened to me. Even if it's for a couple hours, still a couple hours, I'm not thinking about that thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you think that there is a way, do you think there's a solution? I know obviously you're never going to eliminate it. Is there a way to ease it or make less of it, you think?
Yeah, I mean, well, first we have to be able to house people. That's obviously, you know what I mean? If we look at how do we solve homelessness, I mean, we need to have homes. But then it's like looking at the mental health and the understanding of why is the person engaging in this? That's the biggest question. Why are you doing this? And then looking at mental health again. If it's going to take me 2 years to go see someone, I'll just walk to the weed store. It's right there. You know what I mean? I can go across the street, get a coffee, get some cigarettes, get some weed, get some booze, go home, do some shopping, do some gambling, watch some porn, and I'm good, right? So it's like, but why? Why do you feel like you need to do that? There's a difference between doing something recreationally and something that now has control over you.
Hmm. I love your attitude, by the way. How you're like, solve homeless. First off, we need more homes. That's the
It's just, and I'm not trying to, it's like that's
no,
that in itself is a big, you know what I mean?
yeah,
This
that's a whole other
topic,
thing. I
but
know. Yeah. So, what are some of the favorite parts of your job?
seeing people have faith in themselves again.
Yeah, like just seeing them go through it and then come out on the other side.
Yeah, and well, not even that, right? A lot of times you go back to the guilt and shame and people, they feel hopeless and they give up. And it's like just reminding them that you didn't choose this. Like no one wakes up and they're like, I'm gonna be addicted to heroin. Something has happened and they're like, I don't like feeling like this. Like, what do I do? Right? And when you start to explain to them that, hey, you can actually change this. You know what I mean? And they, oh, right? And then you start to work through stuff. And sometimes it's just validating, right? Like a lot of people have been through, and can we bleep words? Like, what is the word? Like they've been through a lot of shit and it's tough. And so it's like to tell them that, yeah, I wouldn't want to go through that either. That sounds intense. You know, if I went through what you did, I'd probably be putting back a 6-pack a day. I wouldn't know how to deal with that. And just for them to not feel like they're a bad person or something's wrong with them, people think, okay, I'm not crazy. I'm not this terrible human being. My experiences have shaped the way that I react to the world and myself.
It must be like a good part of it, right? Just to see that growth happening. What do you find are some of the challenges?
I've had clients die. Yeah. So when I worked with the unhoused population, there's a lot, right? You got to remember addiction is like a continuum. You start with like experimentation, recreational use, like regular use, you get into dependency, and then you're like full blown. So a lot of times when people are at full blown, the addiction might be quite bad to where they're using what we call like non-consumable alcohol. So Listerine, rubbing alcohol, things that are obviously not good for your body and just different stuff. And it's one of those things, right, where it's difficult because as much as someone's engaging in those behaviors, they're still a human. And when you understand that component of there's pain, it's like shit. Like that pain took their life from them.
Yeah, that must be hard to deal with, even on your end, right? Like, I know you're helping a lot of these people, but then you're also going through this stuff yourself, then having to deal with these issues, right?
Yeah, like there's stuff like I'll have like clients where we're going through like the same thing. And so my thing I talk about is I don't work with females often. I've spent a lot of my career working with boys from the age of say like 13 to 18 and then men. And I say there's a reason. Some of my shit I haven't dealt with. And it's not fair if someone's sitting across from me and they're saying something to me that I am now checked out because I'm now traumatized thinking about what's happened to me. Right. And I say to people, I see a therapist. I've seen a therapist my entire life. Right. You got to do what you got to do. Because if you want to help people, you have to be healthy. Because if you're not healthy, how the hell are you going to help someone else? Right? It doesn't mean you have to be perfect. No one's perfect. But you have to be able to sit down and hear someone tell you some really terrible things sometimes without you checking out or making a face that's going to make them think, holy shit, I'm a terrible person. And then they leave and they use.
Yeah, it must be a tough position to be in, right? And then hearing all that, like I know for me, I'd say probably the roughest stuff I go through, like I go through divorce sales and stuff, but it's not like, so I feel like sometimes I'm listening to a lot of issues and I sometimes see the worst in people, but I wouldn't think it's even comparable to dealing with some of these people that have these addictions.
Yeah, it's like I have a background too in criminal psychology, right? And so it's like through school, it's like I learned like, oh, you know what I mean? It's like when you think you know like the worst of humanity, it's like, no, it's worse than that, right? And so when you sit with people and it's like one of those things you really have to find something positive in your life. You have to have really good coping mechanisms yourself. You have to take care of yourself and do self-care because you are going to hear stuff that's unimaginable sometimes, right? And you go back to childhood stuff. People, there's some pretty deep shit that I've heard, right? That I'm like, if I didn't have the education, the training, and like take care of myself, they can destroy people. Like we talk about secondary trauma, right? Like reliving through someone else's trauma. That can destroy a counselor.
Yeah. And I had a psychotherapist on the podcast a couple months ago, and same thing. She sees a therapist as well, right? And I guess because you need to talk about what you hear and that sort of stuff, even in your sessions and stuff, and
Well,
how
yeah,
it might affect you.
yeah, so with that, right, like, we have clinical supervision, so because I own my own practice, I don't like, I'm my boss, so who's monitoring me? My clients, basically, right? If I'm doing a shit job, they're gonna be like, "Here," whatever, or say something, or they don't come back, but so it's like, we are supposed to have clinical supervisors so we can go to and say, "Client X, I'm struggling with this. What do you think I should do?" And have that person to talk to. But then again, going back to, I'm gonna see a therapist to make sure that I'm dealing with my life, because again, if my life is in shambles, I can't show up and help someone who's having similar or worse problems than me if I'm, checked out.
Yeah, and that makes that's a good point, right? The first time I ever saw anything like that was actually, I said it on the other podcast too, was like The Sopranos, when she's seen a therapist seen a therapist, and I was like, oh, but then I realized that's actually like the reality of it, because you do need, somebody to talk about. We, at least real estate agents, we have our coffee machine that we can be like, you don't believe what you don't believe this. Listen to this, nut job. So, you've been doing this now 20 years. That's a long time. If you had to go back to the start, knowing what you know now, if you had to give yourself a piece of advice starting out, what do you think that advice would be?
You're not going to save the world. I burnt out early on because I really took, how well someone else was doing personal, right? And it's like, you give them information. What they choose to do with it is for them to decide, right? So if someone keeps relapsing or they keep going to jail, because I worked with male young offenders early in my career, right? If something keeps happening, I can't take that home and think like, I'm terrible. What am I doing? You know what I mean? It's like, you can't save the world.
Yeah, and taking it personally and taking it home with you, right? Because you feel like it's your responsibility because you're so involved that, and it's funny you said, because even in real estate, like my first, God, 5 years, 6 years in real estate, I took everything like that personally too. Like if something was going sideways with a deal, or, I always felt like I really had to deliver, and I felt so involved and so attached from it, that you actually have to learn to detach yourself from it, especially when you're dealing with people's like emotions, and you can
Yeah.
get so caught up in it.
Yeah, and that's the other thing too. You have to make sure that you are comfortable around emotions, right? That's the thing, going back to like, humans are uncomfortable feeling uncomfortable, because if you're someone who's uncomfortable around someone crying, you have no business being a counselor, because like, it's inevitable. People are going to cry, right? If you get offended by people who are upset. I mean, I worked in residential. I've had shoes thrown at me, I had beer thrown at, like, I've been called everything, right? If you take that personally, you're done, right? Or you're fighting with your clients, right? Maybe off the record, I've seen people, you know what I mean? You have to go to your boss and say, I think so and so needs a mental health day, right? Because you have to be healthy.
hmm Yeah, and you're right, being able to, like, people yelling at you, right? Like, I've had people yell at me, and my wife's, like, especially when I'm going through high stress sales, like, for instance, divorces, but then, more often than not, I get a call, like, sorry about it, right? And sometimes my wife overhears the calls, and she's like, I can't believe that you just let people talk to you like that. I'm like, well, they're in a high stress situation.
Yeah, like, that's the thing, right? Is that kind of not personalize it. Just remember, like, a lot of times it's like, hurt people, right? It might not be intentional. I don't know what that person's gone through. Yeah, I'm not going to let them come up and punch me in the face and be like, this is fine. But remembering that sometimes someone's going through something, and they don't either have help or know what to do to help themselves. And it's just so built up, right? And you're like that last straw. Hey, you can't do that. Shut up, right?
Mm, yeah. Well, this has been really fun. I've been enjoying this. I feel like we could do a 2-hour episode, but I got to put a cap on these things. So, Sarah, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I enjoy this. I hope at least if one person is like, I feel better about myself, or, maybe I'll talk to someone, that'll
If
make me happy.
if somebody is going through a situation where they feel like they maybe want to reach out for some help, what's the first best step?
Well, if they want to talk to me,
Yeah, your information will be in this.
yeah. I mean, the biggest thing, right, is that, if you're in immediate danger, call 911, go down to St. Joe's downtown there, but then go to your family doctor, right? Go to either the family doctor and see if you can go through public services. If you have the ability, you can go into Psychology Today and look for someone if you want to do pay for services. There is stuff out there, but again, like, there's a wait line, there's all these different things. But like I say to people, because you got to pay to see me, right? And people are like, oh, and I'm like, you're buying drugs. You know what I mean?
That's true. Yeah.
Right? And this is the thing, like, once you build a relationship with people, like, some people might be like, "She's so rude," right? But, like, you get to know, it's like, know your audience, right? And so my clients will laugh, right? They're like, "Oh, yeah, I guess." And then, 6 months come by, they're like, "Do you know how much money I have?" And I'm like, "Tell me." And they're like, you know what I mean? And I say to them, use that as a motivator, right? Instead of buying cocaine and alcohol, at the end of the year, me and my wife are gonna go on a nice trip.
Yeah. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, I love it. Thank you, Sarah. I think as people are definitely going to get value from this. This is actually, I really enjoyed this podcast. So thank you so much
Thank you.
for taking the time. Everybody else, thank you so much for tuning in. Until next time, take care.